Hello and welcome back to the Rekt Capital channel, and welcome to today's Bitcoin update. We're going to be focusing on the weekly time frame and also on the short-term fluctuations in price because we've recently seen a pullback. Many people are going to call this a crash and be emotional about it, but it's only a pullback from a resistance into which we've just been consolidating in for a few days now. So many people, altcoin hodlers, have been accumulating altcoins, and we've been seeing a few relief rallies across the board for altcoins, and that's because we've seen consolidation in Bitcoin's price action at a resistance. But before we dive into those short-term fluctuations, I want to talk about the macro scale and what to expect. And the answer here is that we need to expect consolidation. Because if we look at the historical performance of Bitcoin after each of its halvings, well, what did Bitcoin do in the 8 weeks after halving 1? So first of all, week 1, small breakout, week 2, small pullback, week 3, small breakout, and then for many weeks we saw a lot of consolidation before actually breaking out into an exponential bull run. Now, this is essentially showcasing that, number one, we have to be patient in terms of our holdings for Bitcoin because we're not going to see much movement in terms of what Bitcoin could potentially do. We're going to see actually a lot of consolidation, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, which leads me to my second point, because consolidation actually really benefits altcoins, right? So because we've seen a rally in Bitcoin all the way towards 10,000, altcoins are going to try and catch up to that. And we've seen a bit of that catch up already as Bitcoin has been at that 9,700 resistance. A bit about that later on in the video. And speaking of altcoins, guys, tomorrow is the next live webinar. I'm going to be sharing my strategy for altcoins after the halving. This was a recurring question that I got in last week's webinar about my post-halving investing strategy for Bitcoin. It was a fantastic webinar, lots of amazing engagement and questions. And one of the questions that I got quite a lot was, what is my strategy for altcoins? And this is the very question that I'm going to be researching and talking to you guys about in the webinar tomorrow at 7 p.m. UTC. May 21st. I hope to see you guys there. Pre-order discount as always, $4.99, and of course you can reserve your spot today, so feel free to dive into that webinar. I'll speak to you guys tomorrow about my strategy for altcoins, but let's dive into 12 weeks after halving 2. Week 1 is the small pullback, week 2 is the pullback that's a little bit stronger, 22%, and then we actually see a lot of ranging before a small breakout. But in any case, in the weeks that followed, more and more ranging for many weeks at a time until we actually break out into a new bull run. So it's very important to just stress that increasing your altcoin exposure during these weeks of consolidation for Bitcoin could be a good idea in terms of maximizing your profits when it comes to altcoin positions, because we tend to see a lot of consolidation in the weeks after halving 1, 2, and 3. And it looks like these are the very initial signs after halving 3 at the moment that there is a lot of consolidation, and we're actually seeing historical recurrence in that performance in the form of consolidation. So because it took Bitcoin 8 weeks to break out into a new bull trend after halving 1, and because it took 12 weeks to do the same after halving 2, it's very important to bear in mind that we could see a lot of consolidation going forward, and this could actually tie in with altcoin hype cycles, right? That model that I created. The altcoin hype cycles where we just see that cyclicity in altcoin price appreciation and then price depreciation over time. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the short-term price fluctuations in Bitcoin. Here is the recent pullback. This is essentially the consolidation at these highs, at this blue flagging diagonal resistance. And because we couldn't confirm a breakout on any real time frame which would really confirm that breakout, we got a rejection which has been quite sharp, but not as sharp as this one, for instance. So this is only a pullback. It is possible that we could still see this sort of wicking price action where buyers are just scooping up this pullback, but that's something that we need to still see, because this dotted diagonal right over here could still figure as a support. But in any case, what I'm actually looking for is for Bitcoin just to maintain the upper half of this flagging structure on the daily. So as long as it's above 9,100, this black diagonal, then it's all well and good in terms of potential continuation from a breakout from this structure towards the upside just to meet that supply zone starting at 10,000. So as long as 9,100 is still intact on this retrace and Bitcoin just maintains itself above there, then I have no reason to believe that we're going to actually break down from here and revisit the bottom of this flag. But in any case, these are the trigger points, right? This is the trigger point. This is one trigger point. If Bitcoin loses this level, then the next level could be this support right over here. And should this support get broken, then of course it would be this next level. So these are just the trigger points that I'm watching for in terms of this flag. But what we need to stress over here is that this is the daily flagging structure, and this is the halfway point, this black diagonal, which is of course the macro trend line, which has been significant since mid-December 2017. So of course, last week I spoke to you guys about how a pullback into this black diagonal is quite possible this week, right? Because we've seen a confirmed breakout, which is a candle close above this trend line, and naturally speaking, in terms of breakout theory, a pullback to just turn this old resistance into a new support, that's totally possible. So that's something I'm going to be watching for this week, this pullback into that old resistance just to test it as a new support. And should we get that this week, that would be fantastic confirmation that we are really on the cusp of a new era for Bitcoin. And just to talk about this, there's a variety of ways we can actually draw these trend lines. And this is actually a chart from Nebraskan Gooner, a chartist I really respect on Twitter. He just segmented how we should think about Bitcoin's price action while bearing in mind the amount of ways that we could potentially plot a trend line relative to the December 27 highs. So many people will use the wicks and connect them. Some people will use the candle bodies. Some people might not even use this December 2017 high. They'll use different highs right over here and plot them accordingly, just connecting the wicks or the trend lines. But in any case, what Nebraskan Gooner here is just showcasing is that the different amount of ways that we could plot this trend line on the weekly time frame, it just accounts for this neutral zone right over here. And that just means that we need to gain a little bit more clarity in terms of whether we really are in a new bull market or whether we're actually going to see a rejection and see a pullback, which he suggests would be a bear market. And I really like this chart because it just showcases, it accommodates for all this different bias, right? Because you could argue that however you draw your trend line will be influenced by the sort of bias you have. So if you're if you have more of a bearish bias, you're going to probably draw the trend line that Bitcoin is still below the resistance right over here. And if you're more bullish, then you might draw a trend line that's actually below Bitcoin's current price action, and that we're actually seeing a pullback into this trend line this week. So in any case, this sort of drawing that I have over here, this is more of a bullish bias, right? But I do try to be objective about price action, so I'm not trying to skew my bias in any way, because for me, it's all about trying to be as objective as possible for you guys, but also the objective stance is often the more profitable one. If it's going to be bearish, then I'll just tell you guys. If it's going to be more bullish, then I'll also tell you guys. This is how I'm seeing the chart, but in any case, it's also good to bear in mind that you can draw these trend lines in a variety of ways, and we have to bear in mind that we're still in this sort of purgatory. We're still in this neutral zone where we really haven't confirmed a new trend yet. So Nebraskan Gooner does a very good job at just showcasing that. So a breakout past 10,000 and 10,400, that would be the breakout past a really key supply zone, and that would probably mean that we have a new bull market. But of course, if we, for instance, fail this pullback into this support, if we fail that, then we'll probably see a dwindling back into the structure. And this would, of course, mean that we'd see a rejection back into the structure. But of course, I don't think this is necessarily likely, because whenever we see a weekly candle close above a structure, a trend line like this, then it's very rare for that sort of fake out to be crystallized in the form of a candle close. So I do feel like it would be unlikely to just break down and then continue dwindling. But of course, many people using the logarithmic charts, because this is actually a normal chart, not on the log scale. On the log scale, you might even get a different picture that we're actually below a resistance. So this is a very good chart to just bear in mind that we're still in this purgatory and we really need to confirm that trend. But here's another way to just think about Bitcoin at the moment in the short term. this is essentially the supply zone that I mentioned that we really need to break out, really to confirm a new trend and a new bull market most likely. And we're still below this really strong supply zone, and we're actually still forming lower highs relative to the supply zone. So that's something to also bear in mind. But we also have to bear in mind that price relative to this monthly range is still doing quite well in the sense that it's maintaining this range high as a support. And this could, of course, translate into a rally towards this supply zone, but we still need to maintain this range high, because if we can't maintain it as a support, we'll break down into this range. We'll meet the 9,100 level, which you guys know is that black diagonal resistance right over here, just to turn it into a support. And if we can't do that, then we'll probably return to the range EQ, where we've actually seen quite a lot of demand over the past few days, past few weeks really. But we also have to remember that if we actually return to this range EQ, is this range EQ still going to be filled with buy support? Are there going to be many buyers eager to buy at this level? So if we actually continue to see these lower highs forming, we might see a weakening in the buy interest. So that's something to bear in mind going forward. But in any case, we are still above the monthly range. We haven't broken down into it. And as long as we're still above here, a move towards this supply zone is still very much on the cards, especially since we're still forming this flagging structure. So this is just a different way of showcasing Bitcoin's price fluctuations in the short term. But as long as we continue to consolidate at these highs or just above the monthly range, whatever the consolidation, it would be wise to just think about altcoins and how this would tie in with the Q2 hype cycle. Now, of course, this will be dictated a lot by fundamental analysis, and I covered my strategy for altcoins in hype cycles in an article I wrote about that. So if you'd like, just check out my website, rektcapital.co, and you'll find the article there. But in any case, whenever we see consolidation, we have to bear in mind that these altcoins could really take off, especially if they've got some positive FA working for them, that we actually have positive catalysts, because of the halving, Bitcoin really rallied strongly, and now that we're seeing a lot of consolidation in Bitcoin's price action, even though we've seen a rejection most recently, the predominant trend might be consolidation. So most of the attention won't necessarily be on Bitcoin anytime soon, because now that the FOMO, now that the hype after the halving has kind of subsided, we might see the dynamic shift and move into a more risk-seeking approach and towards altcoins, which ties in with the hype cycles for altcoins. And we might be at this point where the hype is lowest, and we might see altcoins do quite well in the coming weeks, as long as Bitcoin really starts to adhere to that recurring theme of consolidation post-halving. And that's about it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider dropping a like, and of course feel free to use the pre-order discount and register and reserve your spot for tomorrow's webinar about my strategy for altcoins after the halving. Subscribe for more videos like this in the future. I'm Rekt Capital, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Speak soon.